Hey everybody, it's Jason Malham with Mastery Life Training, and I want to welcome you to this 6th installment in a 7-part series entitled Taking Control of Your Life. The great writer of the 20th century, Edgar Rice Burroughs, made a statement concerning reasoning I want to share with you. He said, and I quote, "The more one listens to ordinary conversations, the more apparent it becomes that the reasoning faculties of the brain take little part in the direction of the vocal organs." I think that's a great statement. In other words, people don't reason before they speak. We're talking about the idea of taking control of our lives, and that begins, if you'll remember, with our minds, our thinking. And there's nothing that's more inherent to the idea of just our mind than basic thinking, basic reasoning through life. And it's really not a matter of people not reasoning, but more often than not, they just simply don't reason well. So what is it about your life you're trying to take control of? What is the circumstance you don't like? Is it something with regard to your finances and the income you're making? Is it something else work-related? Is it relationships at the office? Is it clashing? Is it something about a relationship in your private life? What is the circumstance that you don't like? And I guarantee you, if you'll make minor shifts in the way that you reason, you'll find that this is the very thing that will turn it around. We've talked about 6 mental faculties, and this is the 5th of those that we have discussed. We've talked about our perspectives, we've talked about our focus, our will, we've talked about imagination. In the last installment, we talked about using the human memory, and here we're talking about the idea of reasoning. Archibald MacLeish made a statement that I quoted, I believe, in the very first video post of this series. It was actually one of his plays that one of his characters stands up and says, "The only thing about a man that is a man is his mind. Everything else you can find in a pig or a horse." Our ability to reason separates us from every other living being. So we've got to use that faculty and use it well to start seeing significant changes and improvements in our lives. Now, where does our reasoning come from? We talked about a little bit in the perspective session, in the perspective post, on our perspectives or our perception, the fact that we get our thinking from our paradigms. We have our own preconceived way of thinking, our own preconceived notions on how things ought to be. We have a preconceived notion about how our marriage relationship or our relationship with our significant other ought to look, how they ought to treat us, how we ought to treat them, and what happens because of that. We have a preconceived notion or a paradigm, or Tony Robbins calls it a blueprint, on the kind of money that we ought to be making. We have a preconceived notion on how our supervisors, managers, principals, whoever else should be treating us at the workplace. We have these paradigms, and these paradigms tend to control the way that we reason. So what happens? Well, when we have a circumstance in our life that we don't like, it's because if it's something that we want to take control of, and that's what this series is all about, it's causing us stress, it's causing us grief, then what we have simply is a situation where the circumstance that we're faced with does not match our paradigm. If it's relationship related, then we have somebody that is acting in a particular way, and it just doesn't match our blueprint of how that relationship ought to go and how they ought to be treating us. And consequently, now we have grief, we have unhappiness, we have restlessness in the relationship. If I'm unhappy about my finances, the money that I'm making, it's because I have a paradigm in my mind that says I should be making this amount of money. I'm not making it, and according to my paradigm, that means grief. And you could just add to that list whatever it is that's bothering you. And I guarantee you that the issue is the circumstance you're in does not match the blueprint of your mind on how that situation ought to be. What does that mean? Well, it means we use our reasoning to deal with the situation. Now, I'm going to show you 3 different ways you can reason in that situation. The first one is not good. The other 2 are. Unfortunately, the first one is what most people do, and that is they blame. When you have a circumstance in your life that does not fit the paradigm you have regarding that situation, you can be like most people and blame your way out of it. They play the blame game. Now, who can you blame? Well, you can blame other people. So-and-so didn't give me the support that I needed, and that's why I didn't perform well. They didn't train me like I ought to have been trained, and that's why I'm underperforming. They didn't give me the sales coaching that I should have had, and that's why my numbers aren't what they want. You can blame somebody else. I had a poor upbringing, and I didn't receive the nurture that I should have had and the love that I should have had, and that's why I'm no good in relationships now. You can blame all kinds of people. You can blame events in your life. Well, this happened or that happened or this happened, and that's why I'm in this situation or facing this circumstance that I have. Now, you can blame, but blaming is not productive. In fact, oftentimes we probably ought to blame ourselves, but people even take that too far. That can be productive. It's a fabulous thing to say to yourself and to learn this mantra that you repeat to yourself: I am responsible. Whenever you face a circumstance, find some truth in the statement, I am responsible. Now, however, if you take that and you wallow in self-pity, then it's not very productive, but it can get you going in the right direction. So I'm presenting the first possibility of reasoning is blame, but overall, it's not a great option. Now, what else can you do? What are the other two types of reasoning that you can engage in when your circumstance in life does not match the preconceived notion you have of how that circumstance ought to be? Well, the second thing is you can change the circumstance. Take some time, some quiet time, just you and a pad of paper and a quiet atmosphere, and reason your way into a different circumstance. How could I change the circumstance that I'm in? In my coaching that I do with individuals and with company teams, I take them through a 20-idea method, and I don't have time to teach that here in this video post. So let me just simplify this, and let me just tell you, take a pad of paper, give yourself a timer of 3 minutes so that you won't overthink anything. Because you just want your brain to flow. You want ideas to flow from your mind onto the paper. And just number ideas that you have on how you can change the circumstance. Don't judge any of the ideas. Don't get too in-depth on how it could happen or how you would make this happen or do that or where would the money come from or the time or the people. Just let the ideas flow. How can I change the circumstance that I'm in? Now you're doing something in which you're taking control of your circumstance and consequently your life. A third way to reason yourself through a situation where your circumstance does not match your paradigm is to change your paradigm. Sit down and think, is it maybe that my preconceived notion of how a relationship ought to happen and how they should be treating me is something that I could change? Are my expectations too high? Am I a little bit too judgmental? If it's an income-related matter, the reason why I start when I coach people on goals and their dreams, their aspirations, and their wants, the reason why we spend 1 to 2 full sessions on this is because oftentimes when people engage in discovering their goals, they realize that a lot of the ideas that they had of what they would like to do don't really match other things that they want to do even more, and they start changing some of those wants, or at least they realize they didn't really want them to begin with. So sometimes you might just find that you don't need to make as much as you thought that you needed to make, or you don't want the kind of relationship you thought that you wanted, or whatever the situation may be. But those are your options. These are your options. You can, if you have a circumstance that doesn't match your paradigm, you can change the circumstance, you can change the paradigm. But either way, you're starting to use reason to take you out of a place of self-pity or out of a place of the blame game and into a place where you're being productive and taking control of your life. I hope that helps you. I'm excited to talk about the last mental faculty of intuition in our last post in this series. Take care, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.